Even when you rethink the human sciences, you have to have some rituals. And I'm here to provide that ritual function. But actually, this is a great pleasure and honor to be able to introduce this conference and welcome you all to Columbia for what has now become an annual feast this year on the theme and question of rethinking the human sciences, put on by the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society. And we at Columbia are indeed very grateful to Stathis for the extraordinary work he's been doing in the Institute across a variety of its activities, intellectual and pedagogical, but also following on in fine form from the leadership of Gayatri Chakraborty-Spivak, who directed the Institute before Stathis, and of course the founding director, who is in the back row there, Andreas Huyssen, who we all talked into doing this in Gayatri's living room back one summer afternoon in the late 1990s, I believe. But it has been a really important part of our intellectual life here at Columbia. And this current conference is in part funded through the Heyman Center for the Humanities by a grant from the Mellon Foundation called the Disciplines Grant, which Akhil Bilgrami, who for many years directed the Heyman Center, and I put together a few years ago with the idea that we would join a consortial group. In that period it was, in fact, Chicago, Berkeley, and Cambridge that we joined with, but in some sense it's part of a larger consortial effort to work with other institutes and centers for the humanities and other universities to rethink the place of the humanities more generally in a world, of course, in which not just the humanities but everything around it has been changing so radically. The Disciplines Project is called the Disciplines Project because it began with the question about what and how the disciplines were emerging in the 21st century after a 2 or 3 decade efflorescence of interdisciplinarity and even announcements or pronouncements or denunciations of what might be called post-disciplinarity. The disciplines nevertheless emerged in the 21st century alive and well, looking much as in some ways they did even at the period of their initial invention in the late 19th century. And so the question was, had interdisciplinarity and post-disciplinarity in some sense enabled the continuation, even the consolidation of the disciplines, and what does that mean, and what might it mean in particular for the humanities? We therefore launched into a set of workshops, conferences, and projects around where the disciplines were in the early 21st century, how to think about the disciplines in particular in 3 different kinds of relationships. First, of course, simply in relationship to their history and their instantiation within the departments that, of course, were committed to the reproduction of their own fundamental structures and entailments. Secondly, in relationship to the global dimensions of disciplinarity, and in that respect, we both took on various projects to look at how disciplines look in different national settings, in part to engage comparative questions, but also in part, of course, to be reflexively engaged in the question of how national, in fact, the disciplines are, how much they are rooted indeed in their national context, of course, hegemonically in the United States, but nevertheless very clearly part of the American sense of itself, and one can see that in virtually every discipline. Of course, in some senses, it's clearest in disciplines like history, which begin with the American history group and then move out from that to the global. But we were also looking, indeed, at how disciplines have developed in different kinds of national and global settings, and trying to use that as a way to rethink the disciplines themselves. But thirdly, and this is where this conference is critical to what we've been thinking, the relationship between the humanities and the new kinds of work being done in science studies, the whole array of questions that are produced in large part by the overwhelming presence of new technologies, new scientific understandings, and indeed on this campus an extraordinary effort to bring different disciplines together under the rubric of a new major building and initiative around mind, brain, and behavior. The disavowal of the biological components of the human behind both humanism and the humanities is something that, as an historian and anthropologist, I've experienced and lived through and been completely part of all of my academic life, remembering back to the thrilling denunciations of sociobiology by Marshall Solins when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago in the 1970s, thinking that, of course, culture, history, and literature would simply trump the more fixed and biologically rooted conceptions of the human that in that particular iteration, of course, came primarily from primate studies. But I think that period of disavowal, at least for me, has had to both be not only be suspended, but to yield to the recognition, indeed, that one of the things that the humanities has to do much more aggressively and much more productively is to engage precisely the set of questions that we're going to be thinking about today throughout this incredibly interesting conference. And so I yield the floor, as also my old prejudice, and welcome you all and look forward to a day of extraordinarily interesting intellectual exchange. So I want to thank Stathis for the amazing work he's done on this and invite him back to really kick the conference off. Stathis, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of words of welcome. I do want to thank our distinguished participants and colleagues for agreeing to stage this conversation, especially Jonathan Metzl, who stepped in on very short notice for Kostas Douzinas, who had to cancel for medical reasons. And Jonathan is not even here. I think he's on the way here from the airport this morning. And I also want to thank a couple of other colleagues who were part of this initially but could not make it, Jean-Pierre Dupuy and Paul Rabineau, as well as others who are unable to be here for various reasons. People I've been in conversation with about this, Isabel Stengers, Jane Bennett, Joanna Burke, Carrie Wolf, to name a few. Last time, conflicts are inevitable, so we are deprived of the presence of various friends and colleagues because the ACLA, the American Comparative Literature Association conference, is happening at the same time at Brown, scheduled subsequently after we had scheduled this. In addition, our dear friend and colleague Gayatri Spivak is involved in a tree planting ceremony in honor of the late Wangari Maathai, right out in front of Morningside Park. She won't be able to come until maybe later this evening. Having said that, I just want to, I'm not going to burden you with a formal presentation. We're going to hear some very interesting things today. I just wanted to give some words of mostly contextualization. ICLS traditionally hosts an annual conference, and we are indeed meeting under this rubric. And Nick mentioned the disciplines, innovative disciplines grant that's sponsoring this as well. But I've been increasingly thinking that such events should not be ceremonials, one-off conferences, but opportunities to launch collaborative research projects, by which I mean conversation across boundaries, and not just simply disciplinary boundaries in an academic sense, but boundaries of modes of thinking and of learning. The precise way of how to do this is really up to us to invent beyond some rather minimal and rather conventional modes, such as publication of some kind. To further gatherings of this sort or other sorts in our own institutions, and certainly not solely in the United States. I mean, part of what we are here to do is also think about in what ways we can continue this elsewhere and in other modes. We have already also at Columbia launched a seminar under the auspices of the Heyman Center, ICLS and the Heyman Center, on this subject, which will provide further opportunities for people to come and present their work in a collaborative, reflective environment, which we also hope will work as a sort of generative pool for new ways of not just thinking together, but perhaps also teaching together, we hope. So the name of this rubric, Rethinking the Human Sciences, has come initially out of my own current work on reconsiderations of humanism and the human as a category of knowledge, both subject and object of knowledge of itself and others, or its others, in ways very much informed by the pioneering work of many of you here. But it is also out of a need to challenge and go beyond the sense that the humanities have reached a dead end in terms of their relevance to contemporary society, a sense that usually provokes intense defensiveness in our ranks as humanists, which translates to either righteous diffidence or despairing melancholia. I don't subscribe to either of these two moods. So to bring into the discussion the term human sciences is a gesture meant to derail the obsession with the word humanities. I understand that the human sciences is not a concept in currency in the Anglophone tradition, which is precisely why it may in fact be useful. I certainly don't mean to resurrect some sort of 19th century sense of the human sciences, but also feel that we should not be fearful of bringing such terms into currency in an entirely different epistemological context. So if I can be literal for a moment, and this will be the only sort of intellectual thing I will say up here today, I do think that the human as a category, but both as subject and object of science, by science I mean very simply knowledge, is a category that almost endemically, if we can use this term, I'm using it provocatively, has always exceeded itself, exceeded its own contours, even in the heyday of the most traditionally humanist or anthropocentric historical dominance. And the human sciences can perhaps be thought of precisely as in the same excessive mode. That is, as a particular way to come to knowledge, to encounter knowledge as much as to arrive at knowledge by some sort of inventiveness, whereby what comes to be known is simultaneously subjected to immediate interrogation as to what it means for someone to know and for something to be known. So I hope this might create a certain instability in our discourses of expertise, to the fact that some things we know particularly well, and oftentimes in a kind of radical specificity, a kind of a difference of our own. This, more than anything, more than my own work and so on, this kind of producing this kind of instability is more than anything the impetus for this gathering. I'm not going to say any more. I really am eager for us to begin having a conversation. The participants know that they're supposed to speak for about 30 minutes. They can speak formally or informally. It's up to them. There will be a response for about 10 or so minutes, and then the floor will be open. We have a mic here because this is being recorded. So please, those of you who want to ask a question, particularly as the room gets filled as we go through the day, do come up to the mic. Okay, so I want to welcome everyone and to get started with our first panel. Thank you.